An Approach to the Problems of Punishment by S.I. Ben. I shall develop in this article certain distinctions suggested by recent contributions to the philosophical discussion of punishment, which help to clarify the issues involved. Having separated out what I consider the four central philosophical questions, I still suggest an approach to them, which, while mainly utilitarian, takes due account, I believe, to the retributivist case where it is strongest and meets the main retributivist objections. I make three key distinctions. So, to give you a recap before we start, we're basically going to see what is punishment, what are the different ways that punishments are viewed. Okay, and there are different theories of punishment. So, here Ben is making three distinctions between justifying punishment in general, that is, as an institution, and justifying particular penal decisions as applications of it, between what is implied in postulating guilt as a necessary and as a sufficient condition for punishment, and between postulating guilt in law and guilt in morals as a condition for punishment. So he will be making on three different distinctions here. One of them is that how, as an institution, punishment should be applied, and how do we bring laws according to which the punishment can be given. Okay, so the penal decisions for it. Secondly, that how punishment, how guilt is a very necessary thing in punishment. That is, if the person is not guilty, okay, if the offender who has been given a punishment for his crime committed, for his or her crime committed, if the person is not feeling guilty, is that punishment justified then? Will that punishment mean anything then? And also guilt in law, how the person has broken a law, how that person has gone against morality and moral standards, and it is a condition for punishment. That how, for you to give punishment to somebody, there should be a breakage, a breach of law, and a breach of morality. So further, four philosophical questions will be distinguished, which a complete and coherent approach to punishment would have to provide answers. That is, punishment in general, that is, as an institution, any particular operation of the institution, degrees of punishment attached to different classes of offense, the particular penalty awarded to a given offender. Okay, now let's first of all define a punishment. Now, according to Professor Frew, there are five criterias that are involved in a punishment. Okay, so there are five conditions that a punishment should satisfy, and in that way we can call it a punishment. The first is it must involve an evil and unpleasantness to the victim. So the for example, if the victim is enjoying the punishment, okay, to whoever the punishment is being given, if the person is enjoying the punishment, will it really be a punishment? So the first condition for a punishment should be that it should be evil, it should be unpleasant, something that the victim will not wish for or wants to stop. Secondly, must be for an offense. Now, you can't just punish anybody. There has to be a breach of some kind. There has to be an offense or crime of some kind. Only then a punishment is valid. Then it must be of an offender. Okay, so the offender has to be has to breach something, and then that breach should be listed legally or morally, and the person to whom you're giving the punishment, the offender should also be a valid taker or of that punishment, and it must be the work of personal agencies, that is not merely the natural consequences of an action. So we have to put in something extra to give that punishment. It's not we have to go by the natural course of everything. Okay, so we have to artificially give the punishment. How? We'll see how these five conditions are met, or it must be imposed by authority conferred by the system of rules against which the offense has been committed. So there has to be a proper system, a proper government who had stated, not only a government but any form of system. There can be anything, a republic, or how it used to happen in the Greek governance, or anything like that. So there has to be a system, and that system has to have lay out a few things that are considered as a breach, and if somebody commits something against that, that is the institution that can then punish the offender. It is not a misuse to talk, for example, of punishing the innocent or of a boxer punishing his opponent. But since these usages, though related to the primary one, disregard one or more criteria of the ordinary satisfied, they are extensions or secondary usages. In considering the justification for punishment, I shall confine the word to the primary sense unless I indicate otherwise. So, all the five conditions that have been given by Professor Fuel, that has been restated by Ben here in his write up, all of these have to be met and have to be met in their primary sense, just as they have been written in directly what they suggest. Now, he talked about a few distinctions, so let's come to that distinctions first. What is the difference between justifying punishment in general and justifying the particular application? And what, in general, what is the punishment, if and there's a particular application of punishment for a particular reason? There would seem, on the face of it, to be a real difference between utilitarian and retributivist approaches to the justification of punishment. The former looking to its beneficent consequences, the latter exclusively to the wrongful act. Now, the utilitarian way of seeing a punishment would be that the punishment would be according to the breach done. Okay, so for every breach there would be a different punishment, and the punishment would be totally based on the breach. Okay, and the second one is, it is retributivist. Okay, that is done by the to the wrongful act. That means there was a wrong act conducted, there was an offense done, and according to that. Now, for example, if I give you an example here, in the utilitarian way, if we see punishment, so it may be possible that two people have done the same things, but one will get the punishment and other will not. The reason for that is that, let's say, one A and B are the two people who have done the same thing, but A is getting punished, A is getting a punishment because the consequences of the work done by A has produced some wrong and hurtful emotions to the one who has been offended. And if the B has done the same thing, there has been no harm done to the party that B has committed the crime against. In that case, B will not get a punishment because simply because he has not provided any harm or hurt to the party, to the offended. So this is what is utilitarian. That is, you will be punished for whatever wrong, for if you have done any wrong according to the consequences. So utilitarian thinking is based on the consequences of it. Whatever the consequences produced, according to that the punishment would be defined. But then secondly, we have stated, if we talk about the other distinction, we have stated that okay, this act is wrong, so whether the act produces any hurt or harm to anybody or not, still that act would be punished, the person would be punished. The first step is to distinguish between a rule or an institution constituted by rules and some particular application thereof. To ask what can justify punishment in general is to ask why we should have the sort of rules that provide that those who contravene them should be made to suffer, and this is different for asking for a justification of a particular application of them in punishing a given individual. So, I'm just giving an example on the top of my head. Okay, let's say that there are two people who have killed two different 18-year-old boys. Okay, A has killed a boy who was 18 years old, and B has killed a boy who was 18 years old again. So this is the simplest way that I can explain. Now, let's say that A kills a boy who had a family, his parents, his siblings, all of that. So if A has killed an 18-year-old boy, the consequences produced would be the family would be very hurt, the family would be very tragedized, and it would suffer a lot. So according to the utilitarian thing, A would be punished, but according to the utilitarian thing, B would not be punished because he has killed an 18-year-old boy who had nobody in the world, who suppose was an orphan, and that person, so the killing of that 18-year-old boy by B did not produce any wrongful consequences as such. Nobody had to suffer, nobody was hurt or harmed. In that case, according to the utilitarian view, B would not have to be punished simply because his act did not produce wrong consequences. So that is according to a particular, we are punishing according to a particular application. And then punishing generally, you know, a general punishment would be that murder is a murder, whether it had produced wrong consequences or not, and a murderer would be punished. Okay. Retributivist and utilitarian have tried to furnish answers to both questions, each in his own terms. The strength of the former's case rests on his answer to the second, of the latter's on his answer to the first. The difficulties arise from attempting to make one answer do for both. So basically, there are advantages, disadvantages, or there are drawbacks and plus points to both of these views, to the utilitarian view also, to the retributivist view also. But what is happening is that they have been only able to justify one stance. Okay, the utilitarian was only able to justify one stand, that particular application of the punishment, and the retributivists have been able to suggest the other stand, to justify the other stand only. So they have not been able to answer both of them, and that is why both lack something or the other in their theory. What formal criteria must be satisfied in justifying punishment in general as an institution? So, as an institution, there has been institution, instated by a state, by a government, by a community, whatever, a collective group, and that institution has made some rules, and the breach of those rules will call for a punishment for any offender. Now, the retributivist refusal to look to consequences for justification makes it impossible to answer this question within his terms. Appeals to authority apart, we can provide ultimate justification for rules and institutions only by showing that they yield sorry, advantages. Consequently, what pass for retributivist justifications of punishment in general can be shown to be the denials of the need to justify it, or mere reiterations of the principle to be justified or disguised utilitarianism. So, in a retributivist way, the thing with retributivist approach is that you will not have to justify each time why this person has been punished, because you have made the rules, and it is a very simple case that the breach of rules will call for a punishment. In a utilitarian thing, you will have to again, you will have to repeatedly justify why you are punishing this, and how the consequences produced by the act of that person has harmed or hurt somebody, or has done wrong to somebody. So in a utilitarian thing, you will have to keep justifying, say, let's say one single act again and again. One act has been repeatedly done over the years by different people, say the act of killing, or say the act of stealing, okay, or robbing a bank, for example. So every time you will have to justify why that robbery of the bank was, has produced wrong consequences. In retributivist approach, you have that the rules are already made, you won't have to justify it every time. Assertions of the type, "it is fitting that the guilty suffer," only reiterate the principle to be justified, for "it is fitting" means only that it ought to be the case, which is precisely the point at issue. Similarly, since justification must be in terms of something other than the thing in question, to say that punishment is a good in itself is to deny the need for justification. For example, in the retributivist view, they are saying that the punishment is good because it is actually bringing harmony, it is actually leveling things, it is actually making sure that this kind of a crime is not repeated. So it does not need any justification because the punishment is doing something good. For those who feel the need, this is no answer at all. Given that punishment would not be justified for the breach of any rule but only of legal rules, what is the peculiar virtue of law that makes it particularly fitting for breaches of just this type of rule? So there's one lack in a retributivist view, that is that you're only considering the legal rules and the breach of legal rules to make the punishment. Any other rules, say religious rules or any other such, family rules, personal rules, are not considered as a breach to be, to be taken as a breach for giving punishment. So why is what is it that, what is it with the law that makes it so superior that only the breach of that law would be considered for punishment? Even if we make punishment a definitional characteristic of a legal system, so that law entails punishment, we are still entitled to ask why we should have rule systems of precisely this sort. Some retributivists argue that while punishment is a prima facie evil and thus in need of justification, it is less objectionable than that the wicked should prosper. So, to this thing that, to this thing, the retributivist will say that punishment, how can you say that the legal rule is so much superior that only the breach of the legal rule will call for a punishment? So, the answer to this, the answer of retributivist to this is that, it is evil. It is primarily evil, and we don't have to. It is less objectionable than that the wicked should prosper. So it is particularly evil. Any wrong done, any breach of that rule would be evil, and that would call for a stop to the repetition of that evil. So doing this, instigating a punishment for the breach of legal rules, will call that the offense is not being repeated over time and the evil does not prosper. This is to subsume the rule crimes ought to be punished under a more general rule, either the wicked ought to be less well off than the virtuous or the wicked ought not to profit from their crimes. So this is the retributivists take this stand that, what is the point of this? The evil should not be in a better off position than the other people simply because they have committed a crime, and even if they're not punished for it, so that means that they are in a better off position. They have done something wrong, and for getting negative marking for that, they are actually living their life as normal people. So that would make them, or they that would, jump them to a higher scale than the others, or the wicked not ought to profit from their crimes. So this retributivist take this stance. Now, wickedness involves assessment of character. We do not punish men for their wickedness, but for particular breaches of law. So, now this wickedness is, of course, very, very vague when we talk about it. What does actually wickedness involve? And because we won't be able to define wickedness in very, in very definite terms, we had made these laws and these rules, and the breach of these legal rules would call for a punishment. There may be some ignoble but prudent characters who have never broken a law and never been punished, and noble ones who have. Our system of punishment is not necessarily the worse for that. We may have to answer for our characters in the day of judgment, but not at quarter sessions. The state is not an agent of cosmic justice. It punishes only such acts as are contrary to legal rules, conformity to which, even though unworthy motives like fear, is considered of public importance. So, another save that they give, that the retributivists give to their approaches, that a legal system, when it is punishing somebody for the breach of their legal rules, is not responsible for the cosmic justice. It is only responsible, it is only to maintain the, legal paradigm, and only to maintain the legal, or the, balance of their own territory and community. They won't have to, they are not meant to answer for the whole universe or for the whole cosmos, and that is why these legal rules are taken as a stance, or, to the breach of these legal rules only would call for punishment. So they're not, the governments, the systems are not going for a very superior or for a very cosmic rule. So that is why the law and the legal rule has been taken up. And if we offer the narrower ground that the wicked ought not to profit from their crimes, we are bound to justify the distinction between crimes and offences against morals in general. What is the special virtue of legal rules that a breach of them alone warrants punishment? So, what is so special about these legal rules that only a breach of the legal rules would call for a punishment? It seems that the wicked are to be prevented from prospering only if their wickedness manifests itself in selected ways. But how is the selection made unless in terms of its consequences? So, the utilitarian people are the one who depend on consequences. So, if the retributivists do not depend on consequences, what is it that they take up to decide which of the acts are evil and which are not? In any case, if we permit the subsumption of crime ought to be punished under the more general, the wicked ought not to prosper, it would still be proper to seek justification for the latter. It would not help to say justice requires it, for this would only deny the right to ask for justification. I see no answer possible except that in a universe in which the wicked prosper, there would be no inducement to virtue. This assumption, if allowed, would differ the utilitarian stage of justification. It would not render it superfluous. So, anywhere, any world wherein the wicked are prospering, the wicked are not punished for their crimes, they are actually profiting from it, would be wrong, would simply be wrong. And it would be a world wherein virtue is not promoted or supported. People will stop being good, people will stop having good qualities and being virtuous in their life. And that is why the wicked who have done a breach of some kind have to be punished. A veiled utilitarianism underlies Hegel's treatment of punishment and as annulling a wrong. For if punishment could annul the wrong, it would be justified by the betterment of the victim of the crime or of society in general. Not indeed that the argument is a good one, for the only way to annul a wrong is by restitution or compensation, and neither of these is punishment. Now, if we talk about, let's say, the punishment that, it should annul the wrong. Annul the wrong basically means that the punishment should be in such a way that whatever wrong has been done is being paid for. So, the comeback is given in such a way that nobody would feel that the wrong was done in the first place. It would be completely compensated for. But then, this will not be a punishment, this will be a compensation. So, or a restitution of that sort. So we're not talking about a compensation. We cannot get wrong for wrong, or we cannot really fully compensate a wrong. That is why a punishment is different from a compensation. In annulling the wrong, we would, we would ask for such comebacks, and we would, implement such things that after that thing is done, we will not even feel that the wrong was done in the first place. It would be completely compensated for. But then this would not be a punishment, this would just be a compensation. So basically, the victim, or the offender who has committed the crime, would just, there would be no loss for the victim. He would be in parity with the other people who have been virtuous there in their lives. A man may be sent to prison for assault and also be liable for damages. Similarly, with the argument that punishment reaffirms the right, why should a reaffirmation of right take precisely the form of punishment? So, in saying this, that let's say a man who has assaulted somebody has to go to the prison and also pay for the damages. That is what punishment would be. If only one of them would have been considered, then it would be a compensation, that whatever wrong he has done, he is paid just for that. But then, if nothing extra, no extra punishment is given to the offender, then it would not be a punishment. Then of course the wicked would prosper, because they would see that after the compensation of the offense that they have committed, they are in parity with the other people who have not done any offense, who have been true and faithful and virtuous in their life. And then, similarly, with the argument that punishment reaffirms the right, so it reaffirms the faith in people that they have to be right, that they have to be virtuous. Now, again, a question comes, so we have to keep thinking on it. Again, a question comes, why is it that the punishment should be the mode to reaffirm the right? To reaffirm the people who are doing right, who are being virtuous, that okay, they are doing good, that they're not doing something wrong. Would not a formal declaration suffice? And even if the reaffirmation necessarily involved a need, right, or duty to punish, the justification would be utilitarian, for why should it be necessary to reaffirm the right if not to uphold laws for the general advantage? Others have treated punishment as a sort of reflex, a reaction of the social order to the crime following in the nature of things, like a hangover. So now another approach towards punishment is, one has been that okay, it's like a reaffirmation of the right. Another is that it is not a compensation but a punishment, so that the wicked do not prosper. It is the reaffirmation for the virtuous people. It is so that the virtuous should prosper and the virtuous should be given more promotion. Another thing with punishment, another approach towards punishment, is that it is a sort of reflex, that a reaction that, to maintain the social order. When a crime is committed, the social order imbalances, and to balance that social order, the punishment is kind of a reflex that would, level up the social order that has been, imbalanced or unbalanced by the crime. This is to confuse rules with scientific laws. The penal consequences of a breach of a rule follow only because they have decided to have rules or precisely this sort. Laws of nature, unlike rules, need no justification because they are independent of human choice. So, laws of nature, when we talk about rules, the legal rules, they have been made by humans. So, they need to be justified that why is it we are upholding those legal rules as something very, very supreme in our lives. That today, if anybody, according to the law of our country, if anybody steals anything from anybody, they will be punished. So that legal rule is basically having a control over everybody's life, and they're not letting anybody do anything. So the legal rules have been made by the people and we need to justify it, like we have done in your socio political paper when we talk about justice is fairness and when we talked about law K. So we have talked about how these legal rules are justified, how when it is justified because the majority have come together and decided onto something. That is why they are justified, because it is taking the majority opinion. But unlike these legal rules, the laws of nature, they do not need a justification, because these laws are beyond the control of humans. To treat punishment as a natural unwell response to a breach of laws is to deny the need for justification, not to justify. So, if we treat punishment as it is something natural, that would simply mean that we are neglecting the need for justification. We are neglecting it that anything wrong has been done and we are justifying the wrong. Once we agree to have penal rules, any particular punishment might be justified by reference to a rule. So once we have these penal codes, penal rules, these legal rules, whatever punishment we give for the breach of that particular rule, it will be justified, because we have already stated that this is a law, this is a rule that everybody has to follow, and whoever does not follow it will be given a punishment. But this is to answer a different question from that at present under consideration. For Bosanquet, punishment was retributive in the sense that ideally, at least, it was the returning upon the offender of his own will implied in the maintenance of a system to which he is a party in the form of pain. So, according to Bosanquet, a punishment, what is a punishment is that the offender who had upset the balance of the social order that he is a part of, he himself is balancing it again, because he has unbalanced it in the first place, and he is balancing it with the help of pain, because he is giving pain to himself, not he himself is giving pain, because he is enduring that pain, and by enduring that pain he is bringing that social order back and balanced. It tends to a recognition of the end by the person punished. It is his right of which he must not be defrauded. Now, while a criminal may not seek to destroy the entire social order and may even agree in principle that lawbreakers should be punished, his efforts to elude the police are evidence that he does not will his own punishment in any ordinary sense. So, ideally, the person, the offender, should by his own will agree to punishment because he has imbalanced the social order. But practically, it does not happen. And the proof of that is that the person runs away from police. It eludes from detention in jails, in prisons. The person does not want to be punished. So he is not punishing himself. It is not by his own will that he is agreeing to a punishment. He may be unreasonable and immoral in making exceptions in his own favor, but we cannot therefore construct a theory of punishment on a hypothetical will that would be his were be reasonable and moral, for then he might not be a criminal. So if we talk, even if we talk about a criminal would agree that any offender should be punished because they have breached the law. Okay, so for example, a person who, let's say a murderer, and if there is a robbery in the murderer's house, the murderer would want that the robber be caught and he would get his money back, because he would not want to, get his money away. So he would agree to it. So a criminal in general would also agree that the breach of law should be punished. Any breach of law by any person should be punished. But then when it comes to his own thing, when it comes to his own case, he or she will try to run away from it. He or she will try to not be a person, to not be punished, even if he has, breached a law. To say that, and let's say if we talk about that, the criminal will agree that in general a breacher or offencer should be punished. So if we talk about this in a hypothetical sense, that the criminal will also be reasonable and moral, and he would also agree to the fact that other breachers of law should be punished, then of course we would not be able to punish the criminal, because then hypothetically he would also be a part of that system who would want to balance the social order. So for others, he would agree to that. But when it would come to his own case, he would not agree to his own punishment, and he would try to elude from it. To say that punishment is his right is to disregard one of these usual criteria for the use of that word, namely that it is something which will be enforced only if its subject to so chooses, the corollary being that it operates to his advantage. So the punishment is his right. Hypothetically, the punishment is his right. Because he has done something wrong, he has all right to be punished. It is his right because he has done something wrong. But then, of course, the criminal would try to elude from his own right, and simply because that right is not advantageous to him. Only by pretending that punishment is self imposed can we think of the criminal as exercising choice, and only by treating it as reformative can we regard it as to his advantage. So, only if the criminal shows in some way that he is punishing himself out of his own choice and not because somebody else or the state or the people are imposing it on him, only then can we render that that person is actually, practicing his own right, that he's doing it for his own advantage, that he's trying to reform himself for any wrong or any breach that he has done or conducted. By claiming that punishment tends to a recognition of the end by the person punished, Bosanquet introduces such a reformative justification, but to that extent, the argument is utilitarian. To sum up, retributive justifications of punishment in general are unsatisfactory for the very reason that they refuse to look to the consequences of a rule, thereby denying a necessary part of the procedure for justifying it. So, the retributive justification would not really consider the consequences of any breach conducted. They would only look at the part that if a law has been stated, a rule has been stated, and if the rule or law has been breached, the person or the offender has to be punished, whether the consequences produced were wrong or bad or not. That does not matter for a retributive justification. To look to the consequences does not entail treating the criminal merely as a means to a social end, as critics have asserted. For in weighing advantages and disadvantages, the criminal too must count for one. But equally, he must count for no more than one. While we must not lose sight of his welfare altogether, we are not bound to treat him as our sole legitimate concern. So it has to be very balanced. The approach towards punishment also has to be very balanced. We also have to look after the welfare of the criminal, that though he has breached the law, though he has committed a crime, but then the punishment should be according to the degree of the breach done by the offender. Bentham's case is that punishment is a technique of social control, justified so long as it prevents more mischief than it produces. So we have discussed what was, Bosanquet's view on punishment, and how Bosanquet think that, it was his punishment was an offender's own right, that he is doing for his own advantage, for he is willing to maintain a social order. Now for Bentham, punishment again is a technique of social control, but then what it does is it prevents mischief from happening, from repeating itself. At the point where damage to criminals outweighs the expected advantage to society, it loses that justification. It operates by reforming the criminal, by preventing a repetition of the offense, and by deterring others from imitating it. These need not exhaust the possibilities of advantage. Bentham included the satisfaction of vengeance for the injured party. Now, according to Bentham, the criminal should be reformed, and he should be reformed not like he has to be expelled or something, but he should be reformed so the criminal does not repeat his wrong actions and the society does not imitate the criminal, that the punishment should be reformative in a way. Now again, Bentham, now if the punishment is reformative, so the others will argue that it is, that the point of vengeance is not included, but then again Bentham has justified some, added some conditions to it, so that the vengeance part is also satisfied, that the injured party also gets its satisfaction, and at the same time the criminal is also reformed so that he does not repeat his actions, and the society does not imitate his actions, the other people do not imitate his actions. Not all theories dealing with the reform of criminals are theories of punishment. Prison reform is concerned with moral re education, often theories of punishment only if they accept the suffering involved in loss of liberty, etc., itself to lead to reformation. So, when we talk about reformation, it is not, some argue, many would argue that this reformation is not a kind of punishment, because there is nothing loss of the criminal, the criminal is not losing anything. So a process of reformation would only be considered a punishment if it would be a loss for the offender, like the loss of liberty. The person is not allowed to do whatever he wants to, as other people have the right to. Reformative treatment might cure criminal inclinations by relaxing the rigors of punishment. It might nevertheless defeat its purpose by reducing the deterrent effect for others. Reformation is in any case ambiguous. A man would be a reformed character only if he showed remorse for his past misdeeds and determined not to repeat them, not through fear of further punishment, but simply because they were wrong. So, the main goal of reformation would be achieved only when the criminal, the offender, would show remorse, would show guilt, that he or she would actually feel that they are not repeating the wrong action because they fear from punishment, but they would not be repeating the wrong action because they have realized that what they had done was wrong, that they shouldn't have done that in the first place. Only then would the goal of reformation be achieved. If, let's say, a criminal has been reformed and he is not doing the offense again, doesn't mean that he has been reformed. It may mean that the criminal is not repeating the offense because he has a fear of punishment. So, only when the criminal or the offender does not repeat the offense or crime because he or she has realized that it was wrong, any which way, morally, legally, it was wrong for the person, for him or her to do that crime or to commit that offense, only then would reformation be successful. So we have heard about the retributive theory of punishment. We have now somewhat understood what is the reformative theory for punishment. A criminal who decides that crime does not pay is merely deterred by his own experience, which is as much an example to himself as to others. Sentences of preventive detention, transportation, deportation, and the death penalty may all be examples of punishment operating as a preventive. So, retributive theory, reformative theory, now preventive theory. Okay, so we have done the retributive theory that the criminal has to be punished because he has done a breach of law that he should not have done. So he should also be given the amount of pain that he has given to somebody else. Or even if he had not given some pain or harm to somebody, still because he has breached the law, he or she should be punished. The reformative theory would ask for that the criminal be reformed so that the punishment is so that the crime is or the offense is not repeated, simply because the criminal understands what they had done was wrong. Now the preventive theory would talk about how to prevent crime in the first place. Now, death penalty, detention, transportation, deportation, that if a person is deported or exiled from the country, or death penalty is being given, these are preventive measures of crime, of punishment, so that the punishment is not done. Sorry, so the offense is not done in the first place because the person has a fear of the punishment. Punishment might be aimed at preventing repetitions of an offense by the criminal himself, where there are good grounds for supposing him undeterrable. So the retributive punishment we have talked about, that would aim that because the punishment has been done, reformative we have done. Now the preventive would ask for that the punishment be such a way that the criminal himself does not commit the offense in the first place, that the person does not become a criminal in the first place. So that would be a preventive punishment. The strongest utilitarian argument for punishment in general is that it serves to deter potential offenders by inflicting suffering on actual ones. So one utilitarian approach to preventive punishment is that it supports preventive punishment in a way, because it would say that we are punishing the offender according to the consequences he has produced, so that the others do not repeat it. Others have a fear of it or whatever way, but it is not done by others in the first place. The strongest, on this view, punishment is not the main thing. The technique works by threat. Every act of punishment is to that extent an admission of failure. We punish only that the technique may retain a limited effectiveness for the future. So, only if the punishment has an effectiveness for the future, if a punishment stops any, even a single criminal from not becoming a criminal, even a single person from not becoming a criminal, only then the punishment would be successful. Thus the problem of justifying punishment arises only because it is not completely effective. If it were, there would be no suffering to justify. So, to the justification of preventive theory for punishment would come from that, you know from would come from the fact that it should be preventive in the first place, that it should, that once if the punishment is given, it is not repeated, or it is not done by, it is, the offense is not done by anybody else in the future, then you will be able to justify preventive punishment. Retributivists do not deny that punishment may act in these ways, nor that it has these advantages. They maintain only that they are incidental, that a system of punishment constructed entirely on these principles would lead to monstrous injustices. These I consider below. So, now the retributivist or the retributive approach would say that, would not deny that if a punishment is reformative, or if a punishment is preventive, these are the advantages of punishment. But then it is not practically possible for us to build a system, because somewhere or the other these kinds of punishment, where the reformative punishment or a preventive punishment would call a very specialized or a personalized punishment to different cases. So, it is evident, however, that while some sort of justification can be offered within the utilitarian framework, the retributivist is at best denying the need for justification and offering utilitarianism in disguise. I conclude, therefore, that any justification for punishment in general must satisfy the formal condition that the consequences for everyone concerned of adopting the technique shall be preferable to the consequences of not doing so. So, the retributivists do not justify the punishment in the first place. They would simply say that because it is a breach of law, the person has to be punished, the offender has to be punished. If the main advantage arises from a lower incidence of crime, this must be weighed against the penal suffering actually inflicted, and these together must be preferable to a higher incidence of crime but with no additional suffering inflicted as punishment. This is a frankly utilitarian conclusion. The strength of the retributivist position lies in its answer to second question to which I turn. So, when compared with the reformative or the preventive punishment, the retributive punishment may seem a little weak simply because they're punishing the person for a breach of law. They're not looking at consequences, they're not trying to justify the offense done, but simply because a breach of law has happened. So now when we look at the formal criteria that must be satisfied in justifying any particular application of the technique of punishment, in this case, the strength of the retributive punishment, the not the justification, because the retributives are not really concerned with the justification, but the strength of the retributive punishment would lie in the second approach.